we've been all saying that there's an overestimation of GDP. And especially in the demonetization year, the new series showed that the rate of growth was the highest at 8.2%, whereas everybody felt that during demonetization the rate of growth had fallen. So there have been doubts about this GDP figures. So what this does is it adds to that controversy, by saying that the rate of growth was on an average 4.5% and not 7% between 2011-12 and 2016-17, right? Now this is also the period where the new series kicked in. And the new series came under several kinds of problems, because first when it was announced, then the back series was not there for comparison, so we didn't know how the things were changing. And then when one committee of the government, came up with the back series, then there was controversy because that showed the UPA 1 and 2 had higher growth rate than the NDA period had, So the government rejected that report, okay. And then the government came out with its own series, which again ran into controversy, because it showed that the NDA period and especially the demonetization year was the best year. What we must understand is that this new series that was created was from 2011-12. So the base year was changed from 2004-5 to 2011-12. And it's in this part of the series that the Subramanian paper says that the rate of growth is overestimated. Now, we've been all feeling, that if the economy is growing at 7% or 8%, in some quarters, then there should be a lot of feel good. But that feel good has been missing in the economy, There's been rising unemployment, there is investments which have not kicked up, So if there's such a high rate of growth, then everybody should be feeling good, employment should be generated. But we now know that employment was in deep problem. Growth didn't look like very good because the index of industrial production wasn't rising very much. Agriculture was facing a crisis. So how come at 6, 7, 8% rate of growth, the economy is facing so many problems? So there was doubts. So in that sense, Arvind Subramanian's paper suggests that the rate of growth has been overestimated by the new methodology. The question is, how correct is he in the figures of 4.5% and so on? We must see that it's not a direct method of estimating GDP. It's an indirect method of estimating GDP. When we estimate the GDP, what do? We look at the various sectors in the economy and we count the different sectors and the subsectors. How much are they contributing to GDP, and then we add it up. Now that requires a lot of data, that requires a lot of methodology and so on, right? What Mr. Subramanian has done now is to use a simplified method, seeing some key inputs into the economy, like electricity, like two-wheelers, and like air travel and so on and so forth. And then using that to estimate what could be the size of the GDP, So that's an indirect way rather than the direct way that the government used to use. The second thing they have done is they have compared it with 70 countries' data. When you compare with 70 countries' data, then it creates a certain degree of problem, because Indian economy is not like most other economies, especially not the developed economies. We have a very large unorganized sector, which is 94% employment, 45% output, right? So that kind of large unorganized sector, a lot of micro units and small units, in the economy, that kind of, thing is not there in other economies. So how valid is it to use this kind of inter-country comparison? One has to look at the methodology and so on more carefully to be able to analyze how far that would be valid for the Indian economy. That the Indian economy experienced several shocks, starting with demonetization in 2016 November, so which covers the period 2016-17, and then GST, and then after that the NBFCs, the shock of the ILFS, and now the Dewan Housing and Finance companies, this thing. So these are all producing shocks to the unorganized sector. Now unorganized sector data comes with a time lag. So GDP figures as it is were incorrect, and my estimate is that GDP figures post demonetization had fallen to 1% rate of growth. They were no more 7%. Okay, and the reason why it had fallen to 1% is because the unorganized sector has been declining rather than rising, and our employment data suggests that, because bulk of the employment is in the unorganized sector. So that supports the fact that the economy is declining rather than rising. And then soon before the economy could recover, you had the GST shock. And the GST shock also affects the unorganized sector because it's not able to cope with the complexity. And then before one could get out of that, you have the NBFC shock. And the NBFCs are where the unorganized sector gets its loans from, etc., etc. So the NBFC shock has continued. And then the government has been trying to push, digitization. And unorganized sector is not able to deal with digitization. So these are the continuing shocks to the unorganized sector. Now that is not taken into account by the Subramanian paper. And that's not in our GDP calculation. So GDP is not a very reliable figure. It's what is the best you can do at a given point of time. So you can set up another committee to look at the errors that are there in the preceding series, and you've had these changes every 5, 7, 10 years, in the past 40, 50 years, and you can have one more change, So it's a good idea to set up another committee and to look at, the thing. But more importantly, data should be transparent so that you know what assumptions are there and where the errors are coming from, It's the transparency that has been missing, and that's why so many different problems are coming up. So data should be made available, it should be transparent, and you cannot say, once the data comes, you can't say, now I don't accept it, okay? Because if you don't accept it, then you have to have good reasons. And the good reasons can only be that there are some problems with methodology. And if there's problem with methodology, set up a committee to change the methodology. But when the data has come, you can't say, I won't accept it. Okay? That is what the government has been doing, and that is incorrect.